The Supreme Court chamber grew utterly silent. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stood firmly at the podium. Her dark navy suit set against the deep mahogany wood surrounding her. For a heartbeat, not a sound could be heard. The tension was thick enough to cut through. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, typically known for her calm and measured tone, leaned into her microphone. Her voice, sharp and stern, carried across the room. "Congresswoman Crockett, that will be enough. Please take your seat." Gasps broke out in the audience. Law clerks exchanged uneasy glances, and even the justices themselves seemed startled by Sotomayor's unusually harsh tone. Crockett gripped the podium tightly, her knuckles pale. Everyone assumed she would yield, gather her papers, and leave quietly after such a pointed reprimand from one of the court's liberal leaders. Instead, she reached into her briefcase and pulled out a document no one imagined existed. Her voice was steady, almost metallic, as she answered, "Justice Sotomayor, with full respect to this court and to you, I cannot and will not sit down. Not while I hold proof that transforms the entire foundation of this case." The chamber filled with murmurs. Sotomayor's stern expression softened into genuine surprise. What unfolded in the next 3 minutes didn't merely silence the Supreme Court. It redefined how Congress and the nation's highest bench confronted one another. Before revealing the details of that moment, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more political showdowns that mainstream outlets never broadcast. Turn on notifications so you don't miss our latest breakdowns exposing the real battles inside America's corridors of power. To truly grasp the magnitude of this clash, we first need to step back and understand who these two extraordinary women are and how they ended up in this unprecedented confrontation. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, age 70, had long been regarded as a cornerstone of the liberal bloc since President Obama appointed her in 2009. As the first Latina and only the third woman to sit on the court, her rise from a Bronx housing project to the nation's highest bench made her a living symbol of the American dream. She earned a reputation for incisive questioning during oral arguments and for passionate dissents that highlighted civil rights, voter protections, and immigration issues. Her opinions often focused on how court rulings impacted everyday people. Yet, behind closed doors, colleagues revealed her growing frustration with what she saw as political performances inside the court. In recent months, she had privately warned that hearings were becoming more like staged theater than serious deliberations. Representative Jasmine Crockett, age 43, embodied a new era of leadership on Capitol Hill. Winning her Texas seat in 2022, the former defense attorney and civil rights advocate quickly carved out a reputation for fearless questioning in committee hearings and sharp takedowns that often went viral. Before Congress, she had built an impressive legal track record, securing victories in civil rights cases and even leading her local NAACP chapter. Known for her plain-spoken style and skill at breaking down complex legal issues into clear language, she quickly rose in progressive circles as a force to be reckoned with. The case that brought her into direct conflict with Sotomayor, United States versus Voting Rights Coalition of America revolved around sweeping state-level voting restrictions. Critics argued the measures unfairly burdened minorities, seniors, and voters with disabilities. The Justice Department challenged the laws, pushing the matter all the way to the Supreme Court. With millions of ballots potentially at stake in the next election, the outcome carried enormous weight. Crockett, though not officially part of the DOJ's team, was granted permission to address the justices because of her unique background and direct ties to impacted communities. The tension between Sotomayor and Crockett had been simmering even before the hearing. Days earlier, Crockett appeared on a cable news show where she criticized the Supreme Court for consistently failing to protect voting rights since the Shelby County ruling in 2013, which weakened the Voting Rights Act. Although she didn't mention Sotomayor by name, her remarks were taken by some as a critique of liberal justices for not doing enough to slow the court's conservative drift on elections. By the time Crockett stepped up to the podium, the atmosphere inside the chamber was already electric. Chief Justice Roberts had allowed her 10 minutes for arguments apart from the DOJ's. Conservative Justices Alito and Thomas listened with skeptical expressions. Justice Barrett leaned in, curious. Justice Kagan wore her usual poker face, while Justice Jackson, the court's newest member, observed closely. Crockett opened not with citations or precedent, but with human stories. She told of voters who had done everything right but were still denied their fundamental right. An 87-year-old veteran, a lifelong voter since 1956, rejected because his driver's license had expired. A disabled woman unable to stand in line for 6 hours at her precinct. A college student, registered months before, suddenly purged from the voter rolls without warning. Then, Crockett pivoted to direct criticism of the court's record on voting rights, and that was when Justice Sotomayor abruptly cut her off. What do you think? Has the Supreme Court lived up to its duty to protect voting rights in America? Share your thoughts below. Do you believe the court should take stronger steps to ensure every citizen's ballot counts? Congresswoman Crockett, Sotomayor began, her voice sharp in a way few expected. While I respect your advocacy, I must remind you, this court operates on law, not emotions. Your stories are compelling, but where is your legal foundation? The room froze. It was rare for Sotomayor, known as one of the court's progressive anchors, to press so hard against an advocate for voting rights. Crockett paused only briefly, then responded, Justice Sotomayor, these examples show the very real harm of the laws before us, harm that I believe directly violates Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Sotomayor interrupted again. We are well aware of those statutes, Congresswoman. What this court requires are arguments framed within the legal tests established in *Branovich v. DNC* and *Shelby County v. Holder. So far, you've presented none. The atmosphere grew even heavier. Legal experts exchanged knowing looks. Sotomayor rarely cited rulings that she herself had fiercely dissented from. With respect, Justice Sotomayor, Crockett pressed on, her voice firming, I believe those precedents were wrongly decided, and that they directly caused the disenfranchisement we are witnessing today. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. To attack precedent so openly was a daring gamble. Justice Alito leaned forward with a faint grin, seemingly pleased to watch a liberal justice push back on Crockett. Congresswoman, Sotomayor replied, her tone rising, this court does not exist for you to rig settled law or deliver political speeches. If you cannot operate within the bounds of precedent, then I suggest you step aside and allow counsel who can. The chamber went still. Law clerks froze mid-note. Reporters scribbled frantically. Rarely, if ever, had a justice known for empathy told an advocate so bluntly to sit down. Crockett remained motionless at the podium. For a moment, it seemed she might back down. But instead, she slowly opened her briefcase and withdrew a folder stamped *confidential* in red. Justice Sotomayor, she said evenly, I am not here to grandstand. I am here because I possess evidence that goes directly to how this court must apply its own precedents. She opened the file and continued, 3 weeks ago, my office received whistleblower documents from within Arizona's legislature. These papers, authenticated by 3 separate sources. Independent investigators disclosed that the architects of these voting limitations openly discussed focusing on minority communities. The chamber filled with murmurs. Chief Justice Roberts tapped his gavel softly. In private correspondence, included in my amicus filing, though I recognize the court may not have reviewed them yet, the sponsors calculated which types of identification were least common among Black and Latino citizens. They spoke about shutting down polling stations in minority areas while opening more in predominantly white neighborhoods. Crockett raised a printed email. This message from Senator James Holbrook, the principal author of Arizona statute, declares, and I quote, if we adopt all these steps, we should cut turnout in the targeted areas by 15 to 20%, which ought to be enough to preserve our majority. Justice Sotomayor's demeanor shifted from annoyance to sharp interest. Congresswoman, are you saying you hold documentary proof of discriminatory intent that was not available to the lower courts? Yes, Justice Sotomayor, Crockett answered. These papers were leaked to my office only after the appellate ruling. They directly undercut the state's assertion that the restrictions are meant to fight fraud. Justice Thomas broke his normal silence. Ms. Crockett, even if this evidence is real, which has yet to be shown, this court has consistently affirmed that states retain broad powers to regulate elections. Mere discriminatory effect is not enough to strike down voting laws. Crockett turned toward him. Justice Thomas, with respect, I'm not presenting evidence of disparate impact alone. These records show deliberate discriminatory purpose. Exactly the factor this court has said would alter the analysis under Branovich. Justice Kagan broke in. Congresswoman, while the material you describe sounds potentially significant, there are established avenues for submitting new evidence. A Supreme Court hearing is rarely one of them. Crockett inclined her head but held her stance. Justice Kagan, I understand your procedural concerns, but these records expose bad faith in the case before you. The state's entire defense rests on the idea that the measures are legitimate fraud prevention tools. These papers prove that rationale is a smokescreen. Justice Barrett leaned forward. Have you provided these documents to opposing counsel? Yes, Justice Barrett, Crockett responded. Their office received copies 2 days ago along with our request to supplement the record. Chief Justice Roberts frowned. That motion hasn't reached me yet, Congresswoman. I understand, Mr. Chief Justice, Crockett said, but given how consequential this evidence is, and the court's pending decision, I felt obligated to bring it directly before you today. Justice Sotomayor, her irritation now replaced by concentrated focus, spoke again. Congresswoman Crockett, though your method is unconventional, the content of these documents, if confirmed, would indeed be relevant under existing precedent. She paused, then said more firmly, yet there are prescribed procedures for offering new evidence. By presenting it in this fashion during oral argument, you bypass those procedures and place this court in a difficult position. Her voice hardened once again. This is not how the Supreme Court functions. I must insist you honor its processes. These records must be properly submitted and authenticated before we can review them. Until then, I ask that you sit down and allow the hearing to continue. The chamber fell still, every gaze fixed on Crockett. The standoff had reached its peak. Would she retreat, or challenge a justice thought to be aligned with her side? Jasmine Crockett stood frozen at the podium, seconds passing like minutes. Then, with deliberate calm, she reached into her briefcase and withdrew not another document but a small audio device. Justice Sotomayor, she said evenly, I deeply respect you and this court's traditions. It is exactly out of respect for this institution and the constitutional rights it guards that I must do something without precedent. She placed the recorder on the stand. With the court's permission, I would like to play a 47-second audio excerpt that accompanied the leaked files. Chief Justice Roberts began to object, but curiosity overtook his procedural instincts. What does this contain, Congresswoman? Mr. Chief Justice, it is from a closed-door meeting of the Arizona bill sponsors. In it, you will hear Senator Holbrook plainly state the purpose of the law is, in his words, to keep the wrong voters from the polls. The chamber froze in silence. Even veteran Supreme Court journalists had never witnessed such a moment. Roberts exchanged glances with his colleagues, silent understanding passing between them. At last, he nodded. You may proceed, though this is highly irregular. Crockett pressed play. The audio was sharp and unmistakable. Look, we all know the game, a man's voice said with a chuckle. These ID rules, shorter early voting, purging inactive voters, it's all to guarantee our voters show up and theirs don't. Push this package through and we'll block the wrong voters and keep control for another decade. And the beauty is, we can claim it's all about election security. Several voices laughed on the recording. As the sound ended, the chamber remained stunned. Justice Sotomayor's sternness had given way to shock. Justices Kagan and Jackson exchanged a knowing glance. Even some conservatives looked unsettled. Justice Barrett spoke first. Congresswoman, can you prove this recording's authenticity? How do we know it is Senator Holbrook? Crockett was ready. Justice Barrett, 2 independent forensic experts have authenticated the audio. Their reports are in the materials I've provided. In addition, Senator Holbrook's Chief of Staff, Michael Landon, signed an affidavit verifying both the meeting and the recording. He supplied these materials and is willing to testify under oath, she added, her confidence growing. I realize this is unusual, but the situation is extraordinary. The state is misleading this court, presenting these laws as honest measures to safeguard elections when, in truth, their private words reveal they were engineered to suppress minority voters. Justice Sotomayor leaned back, clearly processing the moment. After a pause, she leaned forward again. Congresswoman Crockett, she began, her tone transformed. I owe you an apology. The chamber gasped. Rarely do justices apologize, much less in public. While I continue to emphasize procedure, the evidence you've shown appears too vital to dismiss on formality alone. The explicit statement of discriminatory purpose in this recording addresses directly the standard in Arlington Heights and later voting rights rulings. If properly authenticated, it could be decisive. The Arizona attorney leapt to his feet, shouting objections to the sudden evidence and demanding a chance to challenge it. Chief Justice Roberts assured him the state would have ample opportunity, but the damage had been done. The recording had been heard, not only by the justices, but also by every reporter present. As the arguments moved forward, the entire balance had shifted. Justices who had been skeptical of Crockett's stance now aimed sharp questions at the state's lawyer about the newly revealed evidence. Even Justice Thomas questioned whether the state would investigate the seemingly open admission of bias by the law's drafters. When the hearing wrapped up, Crockett calmly collected her notes, maintaining an air of composure. But as she prepared to leave, Justice Sotomayor did something without precedent. She descended from the bench while the session was still active and walked toward Crockett. Leaning in so that only nearby listeners could catch her words, Sotomayor whispered, "That took extraordinary courage, Congresswoman. Your approach was unconventional, but your dedication to justice deserves recognition." Reporters strained to overhear, but the details stayed hidden until leaked by the Washington Post 3 days later. As Crockett stepped outside the Supreme Court, photographers snapped relentlessly and journalists shouted for comment. Yet the most powerful gesture came not in words, but in the quiet nod of respect from Justice Jackson, who exited discreetly from a side door. What began with a stinging public reprimand had shifted into one of the most unforgettable episodes in recent Supreme Court history, potentially altering the trajectory of voting rights law in America. The shockwaves of the Sotomayor-Crockett exchange spread far beyond the marble pillars of the court. Within hours, the scene dominated national headlines. Supreme Court stunned. Congresswoman exposes smoking gun in voting rights battle, read CNN. Fox News offered a contrasting view. Procedural chaos. Crockett derails court with unauthorized evidence. Meanwhile, MSNBC declared, historic turning point, court forced to confront racial bias. By evening, an audio file had surfaced in the media, though Crockett's office declined to confirm its origin. The clip of Senator Holbrook admitting efforts to keep undesirable voters from the polls looped endlessly across networks, quickly becoming a defining moment in the national debate. At first, Holbrook dismissed the recording as doctored and misleading. But within a day, under growing political pressure, he announced his resignation, citing health concerns and a wish to devote time to his family. Inside the court itself, anonymous sources told the Washington Post that the justices held an emergency meeting immediately after the session. The debate was reportedly intense, dividing them not just on the evidence but also on the extraordinary way it was introduced. Chief Justice Roberts, ever protective of the court's credibility, was said to be disturbed by both the content of the revelation and the breach of protocol. Justice Alito pushed for dismissing the material altogether, arguing that the irregular procedure invalidated it. Justice Kagan, however, countered that overlooking clear proof of bias would harm the court's reputation more than bending its rules. 3 days later, the court issued an unusual order. Both sides were instructed to file additional briefs addressing the disputed evidence within 14 days. To legal observers, this signaled that at least some justices regarded the material as serious enough to sway the outcome. Crockett, in the meantime, became a household name overnight. Progressive voices hailed her as a bold truth-teller who dared to confront the Supreme Court in pursuit of justice. Conservative commentators accused her of staging theatrics and undermining judicial norms. Yet during television interviews, Crockett stayed calm, steering the conversation toward principle rather than spectacle. "This isn't about me, or Justice Sotomayor, or even the court itself," she told Rachel Maddow. "This is about the right to vote. It's a right countless Americans struggled and sacrificed for, and one some politicians are still trying to strip away for their own gain." Legal scholars split sharply over her actions. Harvard's Lawrence Tribe wrote in The Atlantic that although Crockett disrupted procedural tradition, she exposed a deeper betrayal, the intentional erosion of democratic participation under the guise of election security. Former Solicitor General Paul Clement argued in National Review that Crockett's methods, regardless of motive, endangered the integrity of the court. If every advocate disregarded rules for personal judgment of justice, he warned, the institution itself would collapse. 2 weeks later, an unexpected development took place. Justice Sotomayor, rarely one to grant interviews, sat down with 60 Minutes. While refusing to speak on the pending case directly, her broader reflections were striking. "In our history," she said, "there have been moments when strict adherence to rules would have led to great injustice. Brown versus Board of Education required us to look beyond precedent to face the human truth of segregation. I value procedure deeply, but those processes exist to serve a higher principle, equal justice under law, as engraved on this court's facade." Asked about her exchange with Crockett, she answered cautiously, "At that time, I was defending process. Yet what followed reminded us all that procedure must never overshadow the justice it was created to ensure." 6 weeks after the dramatic session, the court delivered its verdict. In a remarkable 6-3 ruling, with Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Barrett aligning with a liberal bloc, the court struck down the contested restrictions, holding they were enacted with discriminatory purpose in violation of the Constitution and the Voting Rights Act. Roberts, authoring the majority opinion, acknowledged the unusual way the evidence surfaced but emphasized that ignoring its weight would have been willful blindness. Justice Sotomayor's concurring opinion pressed further, when proof of intentional discrimination comes before us, we cannot avert our gaze simply because it enters by an unconventional path. The promises of the Constitution are not mere procedural formalities but substantive rights that must be upheld. The ruling was immediately hailed as the most significant voting rights decision since Shelby County v. Holder in 2013. For Crockett, the decision was both triumphant and deeply personal. At a press conference afterward, she spoke with visible emotion. Today, the Supreme Court confirmed what democracy requires, that laws crafted to exclude citizens from the ballot box betray our constitutional principles. This is more than a legal win. It's a victory for every American who believes that democracy is strongest when every voice is heard. The Sotomayor-Crockett confrontation would enter casebooks, studied not only for its constitutional impact but as a lesson in advocacy, institutional boundaries, and the delicate balance between procedure and justice. A year later, speaking at Howard University School of Law, Crockett reflected on the turning point. When Justice Sotomayor told me to sit down, I had a decision to make. I could honor procedure and remain quiet, or honor justice and speak out. I chose justice, knowing the risks. But there are principles worth risking everything for, and the right to vote is one of them. That moment, later remembered as the sit-down episode, became a symbol of how American democracy, like the Constitution, is alive, demanding courage from individuals willing to challenge even the highest institutions when core rights are threatened. If this account of courage and the fight for justice moved you, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We bring you the most powerful political confrontations and the untold stories behind them. Turn on notifications so you never miss the truth behind today's most defining political battles.